Hello friends, today we are talking about the 3 maladaptive core beliefs that most people have. So you will either have one of these, you will have all of these, and you will have them on a spectrum. So you might just have one and it's just a little bit and it doesn't affect your life too much, or you might have all 3 and it's really affecting your life and you're having a hard time achieving the things you want to do, creating the career you want, having the relationship you want, things like that. So these are established by psychology as being the typical maladaptive core belief patterns. But first of all, what is a core belief? Like, what does that actually mean? So a core belief is essentially a thought that is very subconscious. So it essentially is the why behind our thoughts. So if we ask why to our thought numerous times, the final why is the core belief. So if somebody had the thought, I don't fit in with my coworkers, then you ask why to that. Well, maybe then the next thought might be like something, well, people don't like me. And then the next why might be something like, well, I'm just inherently unlikable. And that would be the core belief, the why behind all of the other whys. And this actually does exist in a hierarchy. So core belief is at the most subconscious. And then we have something called and then we have an intermediate belief that shows up as a rule or an attitude or an assumption, kind of like the example where we had people just don't like me. And then we have the automatic thought, which is the thoughts that come to us automatically. An automatic thought is our instant appraisal. This is how we typically react and how we typically think. They are typically too quick to notice consciously. So unless you're really looking out for them, you won't really notice your automatic thoughts. You'll think that it's just the correct reaction, which isn't necessarily true. And then lastly, we have the conscious thought. So the thoughts that you actually notice, that you really kind of hear going through your mind, those are the conscious thoughts. Okay, so what are these 3 maladaptive core beliefs that, are really harming you and your ability to live a good life, have a great career, and sustain great relationships? So first is the core belief of helplessness. This would be an inherent belief that one is ineffective. They cannot get things done, they cannot protect themselves, and they are just not useful to others. And then the second core belief is the core belief of unlovability. So this really is what it sounds like, is that there's something about you that is inherently unlovable, and that you essentially have almost like a missing quality that other people have that makes you not capable of being loved. And then the third core belief is worthlessness, which typically presents as having an inherent kind of sinful nature or being a danger to others. So some thoughts that you would have if you had this core belief would be something like, I'm dangerous, toxic, crazy, unwell. So it's actually remarkable to me how many people think that they're kind of crazy, like that they are just not normal when it comes to comparing themselves to other people. But the thing is that because so many people think that they're crazy, then that actually makes them more normal because so many people have this core belief, if that makes sense. And so for the unlovable core belief, one of the thoughts that one would have is something like, I am bound to be rejected, abandoned, alone. It's just something that is going to happen no matter what I do. And for the helpless core belief, you would see a thought something like, I am inferior, I'm a loser, like I just never get things done, something like that. So some of these might sound fairly familiar to you. And the thing is that when we really address these, they sound a little bit ridiculous, but most of us have a little bit of this going through our minds on a daily basis. And it might be in that core belief category or in the automatic thought category, or it might be conscious. But there is an underlying feeling that most people have that they are just a little bit less than. They might not be as deserving of love as other people. And this can really create havoc in people's lives. Why did we start thinking these? Where did these core beliefs come from? Like, why do we actually do this to ourselves? So the thing about a core belief is that it starts out as a thought, and it often starts out as a thought in childhood. And childhood is important because it actually does have a significant impact in memory and how memories are formed and kind of how our brains learn to create patterns and to appraise situations and to predict what other people will do. So what often happens is that someone has an experience in childhood that is painful, negative. And the thing is, when you're a child, it's very difficult to actually blame others because you are often at the kind of mercy of your caregivers. So it's difficult to blame the caregiver for something that happens to you as a child because you need to assume that the caregiver will take care of you. Otherwise, your safety and your livelihood is at danger. So what often we see is that children will blame themselves. And that also gives them a little bit more feeling of control over the world, because if we feel that, our caregiver is like this random person that is doing these random things, then that can make a child feel really, really insecure, and potentially it can be really psychologically harmful. So it's often easier for us to assume that we are at fault, because then if we are at fault, we can control the outcome. So what often happens is that in childhood you have a negative event and you appraise it as, this is dangerous, this is threatening my safety, so I need to make sure to remember this and to relate it back to my own personality. So as we relate it back to the personality, it goes to those core beliefs of helpless, worthless, or unlovable. This is essentially almost like an immunological response, because if one were to think I am worthless or helpless or unlovable, then one would start looking for scenarios in which you could actually identify the scenarios where you are worthless, helpless, or unlovable. This sounds like a really bad thing to do for your brain, but in a way it is meant to be protective. So if you are able to identify all the situations in which you are worthless, helpless, unlovable, then potentially you could fix for them. You could solve for those situations and figure out a way to be lovable, helpful, etc. The thing is, it often doesn't really work this way, and what actually happens is that we start identifying all of the evidence in our lives of being helpless, of being unlovable. And as we identify this evidence, we essentially form memories and we form the neuronal networks that create the feeling of being unlovable or being helpless. And after years of doing this, after years of having this thought pattern, then we have the creation of the core belief. It is essentially a thought pattern that is so inherent in us that it feels like the truth, but it is not the truth. It is essentially this giant snowball that was created from a negative event in childhood that led to an introspective appraisal of the self as a protective mechanism. And that's just kind of fancy psychology speak for saying that something bad happened in childhood and you blamed yourself, and then you just kind of kept blaming yourself until you forgot that you didn't have to. And so just like a psychological study that went wrong, there is the possibility that you were completely wrong in your appraisal. And for a lot of us, this is really, really difficult to believe. I just want to plant that seed for you to think about that you might have been wrong about your worth, about your lovability, and about your ability to achieve things in the world. And it might be difficult to believe, but I encourage you to try to see if you can act like you do believe that you are lovable and you are capable of achieving things and you are worthy. And then to try to start testing those in the world and try to look for evidence that these things are true. Because we've spent so much time looking for evidence that they aren't true, so that we are not lovable, are not worthy, are not capable. But if you start looking for evidence that you are, you can start undoing some of this core belief and really shifting to having more positive core beliefs about yourself, which will drive healthier relationships, healthier career decisions, and healthier lives in general.